Everyone says I love you, but just what they say it for I never knew. It's just inviting trouble for the poor sucker who says I love you.
I love good music.
So do I. Let's get out of here.
Sit down.
What'll I say?
Tell them you're not here.
Suppose they don't believe me.
They'll believe you when you start talking.
Friends,
Talk fast. I see a man in the crowd with a rope.
how we happened to come to America is a great story, but I don't tell that. When we first started out, we got no idea you give us this grand reception. We don't deserve it. And when I say we don't deserve it, believe me, I know what I'm talking about. Huh?
That's a novelty.
Hello, YouTube and YouTubettes. Welcome to another Marx Brothers movie review. I am Robbo,
And I'm Becko.
and today we're going to review the Marx Brothers movie A Night at the Opera, which came out in 1935.
The Marx Brothers run amok in the world of opera when Otis B. Driftwood meets aspiring singer Ricardo, who is determined to win the love of fellow performer Rosa. Aided by Fiorello and Tommaso, Otis attempts to unite the young couple but faces opposition from the preening star Lespari, who also has his sights on Rosa. Traveling from Italy to New York, Otis and friends rally to try and win the day.
Okay, Becko, could you tell us who is in this cast?
Otis B. Driftwood is played by Groucho Marx. Rosa is played by Kitty Carlisle. Ricardo is played by Alan Jones. Fiorello is played by Chico Marx. Mrs. Claypool is played by Margaret Dumont. Tommaso is played by Harpo Marx. Gottlieb is played by Sig Ruman. Lespari is played by Walter Wolf King.
Okay, so Becko, what did you think of the overall story of Night at the Opera?
This movie had a really strong plot line. I enjoyed the sceneries and just how they played up the opera in the story and how it kind of travels from one place to another. I felt like the story was really strong.
Yeah, I agree. I think you really hate the bad guys in this, the jerks, I guess you could say. Even though the Marx Brothers are kind of, criminals, or not Groucho as much, but it's kind of like the stuck-up, snobby rich people that you really hate in this movie, and you really cheer for the little guy. And what is your favorite storyline scene?
I really liked the opera at the end. It's kind of where everything comes together, and just a lot happens in that scene that just kind of brings the couple together, and just all the characters and how they play in that scene is really good.
Yes, I also had that. The chaos and the Marx Brothers become sort of in a criminal way heroes in the
hmm
story, and brings the real, the straight heroes into victory, I guess you could say. So, do you have what is your score for the story?
My score for the storyline is a 10.
And I gave it a 9. Next, we'll talk about the quality of the movie. What are your thoughts?
I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was very well made and well directed. This movie stands alone. I feel even if someone is not necessarily a Marx Brothers fan, it just is a good classic movie that kind of stands alone from other Marx Brothers movies. I think it's more of a traditional classic film that's just really really well done.
Yeah, this was the first one I think that they switched over to MGM from Paramount, and Irving Thalberg was their producer, and he put a lot of thought into their movies, and I guess he gave it an MGM production style. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on the costumes or sets or anything?
Well, it all in all, it really felt like a real opera house. I really liked the big stage scenes where, they're basically Harpo is climbing up the backdrops. It gives kind of the scope to sort of the fly space that you have in a big theater. And so the fact that it sort of showed the broad, like the size of the theater, and it didn't feel like you were in a studio. It felt like you were in an actual theater, which I'm sure it was filmed in the actual spaces that it was supposed to be. I'm sure some of the scenes on the ship were just studio, but the way that they filmed it really felt like you were in the places that they were in and not just on a sound stage.
Yeah, I agree. There wasn't like a backdrop or anything obvious like that. Also, I think the editing was good. I didn't notice any editing issues that some of their other movies had in the past. Any other thoughts on the quality? Do you have a final score or any other thoughts?
My final score for quality is 9.
And I gave it a 10. Next, we'll talk about the music in the movie.
I really enjoyed the music. You could tell that they didn't just pick up Broadway stars or actors that happened to be famous at the time. They actually used actual opera singers, so that the singing was, what to me was really high quality and in the operatic style. They didn't just pick up popular musicians to do the singing. They were actually opera singers,
Mm-hmm.
and that really added to the quality. Most of the music was just really well done. It was more than just film music that you see, but it was the kind of the grand opera music from
Mm-hmm.
from actual operas.
Yes, I think overall the performance, the music was very good quality. There wasn't anything that was just kind of throwaway or very simple. It was all very high quality music. Even the Chico and Harpo, Chico on the piano was good, and Harpo on the harp, or even the piano was funny. But then on the harp, that was very quality. So, do you have a favorite song?
My favorite song was Cozy Koza, leading
Mm-hmm.
into Chico's piano solo, and then that leads into Harpo's
So that whole
solo.
section?
But that whole section, because
Mm-hmm.
it kind of feels like it's part of the same song.
Yeah.
I really liked the kids' reaction to Chico's piano
Mm-hmm.
playing.
Yeah.
It just, overall, I felt like it was a really good. They weren't just doing gimmicks. It was like
Mm-hmm.
just really well put into that, and it was funny. It's kind of a funny scene because they're stowaways, so they're
Mm-hmm.
not. They're trying to hide at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, but
Yeah.
it. I think one thing about that song is that we couldn't figure out if the singers were just native people from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
or if they were
Like
chorus
actors.
members
Yeah.
of the opera.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, I really enjoyed the scene and even just the dancing and the costumes, because the costumes
Mm-hmm.
were very like traditional, like European style.
Yeah.
Um,
I was gonna,
costumes.
when we were watching the movie, I was wondering about that. Like, was that period costumes, or do you think they were in their costumes for the opera on
That's
the
the
boat?
thing. I think that if someone was traveling to the United States, they probably would have been in modern day clothing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say if they were just being artistic with the costumes and saying that these were
Mm-hmm.
gypsies traveling and that's just what they wore, or if they were actual costumes. They were supposed to be costumes because
Mm-hmm.
they were actors in the opera. But even then, when you're
Mm-hmm.
traveling, you're not in costume
Yeah.
because you're not performing. It's your day off. So I almost felt like it felt like gypsies, and they were having like a big family supper because they had the spaghetti and all of that, which was kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it did feel like they were trying to emulate an ethnic group,
Yeah.
just to be kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
big funny Italian family style kind
It
of
didn't
scene.
really bother me, even if it wasn't realistic that that's how they would dress on a boat. But
Mm-mm.
because it's not realistic that people would be dancing and singing on a boat either.
Yeah.
but because it's a musical. So,
Mhm.
my favorite song was "Alone." I've always enjoyed that, and that's another
Mhm.
scene where it's not necessarily realistic that they would be performing in that setting, but it kind of works because they're opera singers, and fans were asking her to sing, and
Mhm.
there happened to be violinists and things around.
Sure.
So, but there was a lot of good songs to pick from. The finale was very powerful, and I can't
Mhm.
remember what it's called because it's in a different language.
And I think it was
Uh,
from an actual opera. I don't think
mhm,
any of the music in
mhm.
this show was written for this movie.
Right,
It was written for operas,
sure.
um, and they may all be even from, of course, especially the scene at the end. All that music is from one particular opera that they were performing.
Hmm. So, what's your overall score for the music?
My score for the music is 10.
I also gave it a 10. All right, the performances in the movie, and we'll start with the non-Marx Brothers.
All of the actors in this were pretty strong. I feel like into the 30s, especially the late 30s, movies in general improved. I felt like they were better directed and better acted, and so it just had a more consistent. The performances were more consistent just throughout. The way I almost forgot that Margaret Dumont was in this because I feel like her part was so downplayed that it could
Hmm.
have almost been anybody. She just wasn't in it very much. I don't have too many memories of her being in it, which is
Hmm.
kind of funny. I think her character was a bit less. She doesn't have like a big dialogue with Groucho like she does in some of the other ones.
I
It's a little
I wonder
more.
if that has less to do with her than it has to do with the fact that the actors around her were so good, and she
Mhm.
was about the same as she has always been, and
Mhm.
we're used to that. So it's like, well, I think she's been better, but I think
Yeah.
she's not much. It wasn't like she was much worse. It was just that
She
everybody
did
around her was
yeah,
so
she
much
just
better.
didn't really stand out as much as she does in some of
Hmm.
the other ones.
Yeah, I agree. It was very difficult for me to pick any specific role, but or as my favorite. And the villains really make you hate them, and
Mhm.
the heroes are really lovable in this. And so, who is your favorite non-Marx brother?
I put that my favorite non-Marx brother was Gottlieb.
Hmm.
I also really liked Rosa and Ricardo.
Hmm.
I felt like they were just really well acted, and
Yeah,
I liked Rosa's relationship with Chico and Harpo too. It's like they were all friends, and she was
yeah.
very nice to them, which usually the leading lady often thinks of those characters as like stupid and annoying. But
Yeah,
for her, they were friends, so that was kind
yes.
of a different thing.
Yeah, she was great. She was very lovable and very good actress. And I think Ricardo's was kind of boring, but at the same time lovable.
Hmm.
And Gottlieb was great. And the guy that was the main opera singer that was the villain,
The villain, yeah.
he was really a really good villain. But my
Hmm.
favorite was not necessarily because of acting, but he was so funny as the cop. He wasn't a big
Oh,
part, but I really loved the cop. He just stuck out to me
yeah.
as a so it wouldn't necessarily be the best actor, but the funniest non-Marx brother in my opinion.
Hmm.
All right, the Marx Brothers. What are your thoughts on the Marx Brothers as characters and performers in this?
I really liked it. I liked how Chico and Harpo were just really lovable. They weren't just. I felt like they fit in with this sort of theatrical world that the opera was in. Sometimes in some of the other films, they're like just so out of place. I mean, it's funny that they're out of place, but in this one, it felt like they were more at home
Mhm.
in that space because It's like they're pretty much in costume all the time. They don't really dress normal. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I actually put my favorite Marx Brother is that they're all tied
Oh
in
yeah.
this one. I couldn't
Hmm.
I couldn't pick one because
Hmm.
I felt like they were all really good. I do think Chico stood out a little bit more than sometimes he does because he tends to be the neglected one that is usually nobody's favorite, but I really liked him in this one.
Hmm. Yeah, so Irving Thalberg really made an effort to make the Marx Brothers more likable. I'm going to compare this to Monkey Business because they're both stowaways, except for Groucho. He's not a stowaway in this one, but
Hmm.
in Monkey Business, they're just causing trouble and chaos. That's like
Yeah.
their whole. They're not even trying to be here. Well, I guess towards the end, but
Hmm.
they're only lovable because they're funny. But in this one, they're also stowaways, but they're very likable characters as well. So I think it's kind of interesting because Groucho has a bit more. I wouldn't call him a straight role in this because he's still kind of a jerk to Margaret Dumont or Mrs. Claypool, but he's a bit more. He's not a criminal and he's kind of in it for himself, but he's not quite as over the top funny as he's been in the past, like crazy.
Hmm.
Harpo seems like he's a little less. I'm trying to think. He does some stunts, but he's not as silly as he's been in the past. But
Yeah.
my favorite Marx Brother is Chico. I think he
Hmm.
was really funny in this, and he's as funny as he's ever been, even
Hmm.
though Groucho and Harpo are more subdued. So, what's your overall score for the performances in this?
My score for performance is 10.
And I gave it a 9. The humor in the movie. Becco, what are your thoughts?
Overall, like you mentioned, some of the usual shtick that the Marx Brothers do was kind of downplayed in this. And I think for the type of movie that it is, it's meant to be a more, I don't know if serious is the right word, because it's still a comedy through and through, but it's just a little more, I don't know, sophisticated maybe. And not to say that one is better or worse than the other, but it's not as funny as maybe some of the other movies, but it's very likable, and there's a lot of funny scenes throughout that are very solidly funny, but don't go into the direction of being extreme silliness. Everything's just a little bit more polished, which means that maybe it's not as
Hmm.
it's a little more toned down. Maybe
Yeah,
that's the word.
it's more story. Like all the comedy is related to the stories.
Yeah.
What I forgot to mention when I was talking about Chico is one of the funniest scenes that the Marx Brothers do is Chico's speech when he is acting like when they're acting like the men with the
Oh,
beards,
yes.
the aviators. Is that what they're called?
Yes.
That and then Harpo right after that is hilarious too. But I mean, Harpo's funny, but he's just drinking water. But
Yeah.
Chico's speech is just hilarious. But yeah, that his performance. I think that's why I picked Chico was that scene.
Hmm.
So, do you have a favorite comedy scene?
I think my favorite scene is the breakfast scene that I'm guessing it takes place in Groucho's apartment in New York City.
Hmm.
And he's still trying to hide the stowaways because I guess they're still criminals and they're still wanted by the police officer. So he's just trying to hide them, but in kind of the usual Marx Brothers way, like the the cop is so dumb to what's going on right in front of his eyes or right behind his back. And they even do things that don't necessarily help them hide. It's like they going around and going through the window and taking furniture out. Like, how does that help them? It just makes the police officer feel like he's going insane, but it doesn't necessarily they don't even try that hard to help their own cause
Hmm.
because they don't care.
And the
So
way it ends, where they're like in an old couple in a rocking chair,
Yeah,
Uh,
it's like
yeah.
it's a little ridiculous to where it doesn't. If they're really trying to hide from the police,
Mhm.
why would they do all that?
Yeah, that's also my favorite scene. I think, it was basically a repeat of from Coconuts when there was a runaround between those two rooms.
Yes.
But I think this was an improvement on it.
Oh, for
They
sure.
added some brilliant things. Even the breakfast part before was hilarious. Just, I think
Oh,
Harpo might have been
yes.
ad-libbing with the putting a mustache on himself and like just doing crazy things. And Groucho, you could tell, was humored
Yeah,
by it.
they're reacting
They were
to.
all kind of humored by it.
Hmm.
And then the cop shows up, and one of my favorite lines is the cop said, he goes, "I noticed the table's set for 4," and he goes, "That's nothing. My alarm clock is set for 8."
Yes. Yeah, there's a
And
lot of really funny things. And that scene,
mm,
compared to the entire movie, feels more like
yeah,
they allowed the Marx Brothers flavor to like really shine through,
yeah.
but in a way that's still like really polished and
Mm.
sophisticated.
The
But
only other one that I would compare to that is the opera scene at the end, where they're bringing a lot of chaos, but
yes.
it's not as funny. It's just a lot of slapstick, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So it's not like the brilliant kind of humor
Yeah.
as this
And I
is.
think Groucho's stateroom, where all those people come in, is kind of an iconic scene.
Hmm.
But when I saw it, it wasn't as funny as I remembered it to be.
Hmm.
But the scene where everyone's in there, the manicurist
Oh,
and
the
and
yeah,
Harpo's asleep and all of that.
yeah,
It's it's like it's iconic, but
yeah.
it's not necessarily
It's
as funny as you
yeah,
hope it
it's
is
well
going to
done. I
be.
think that the punchline, which was everybody falling out onto Mrs. Claypool, was a
Yes.
good ending for it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a classic scene. It's not necessarily the funniest. Another classic scene is near the beginning with they're doing the contract
Oh,
between Groucho
yes.
and Chico.
Which is
Mhm.
very similar to other scenes
It's
where they're.
yeah, it's nonsensical, but
Mhm.
it works. Just their timing and their
Yes.
chemistry with each other is just great.
Mhm.
So, what is your final score or the humor score?
My score for humor is 9.
And I gave it a 7. What is your final score for Night at the Opera, Becko?
My score is 9.5.
And mine is an 8.7.
What do we got for dinner?
Anything you like, sir. You might have some tomato juice, orange juice, grape juice, pineapple juice.
Hey, turn off the juice before I get electrocuted. All right, let me have one of each. And 2 fried eggs, 2 poached eggs, 2 scrambled eggs, and 2 medium-boiled eggs.
And 2 hard-boiled eggs.
And 2 hard-boiled eggs. Make that 3 hard-boiled eggs. And 1 duck egg. Have you got any stewed prunes?
Yes, sir.
Well, give them some black coffee. That'll sober them up.